The assignment that I chose was from the course Methods and Assessment, Literacy Intervention for Struggling Learners and Students with High Incidence Disabilities from course 741. It was a vocabulary development assignment, and the purpose of this assignment was for us to do some readings that were suggested by the teacher, and then to write a paper about vocabulary development and effective vocabulary instructional strategies. We were required to explain how vocabulary develops and its impact on student reading success, how to explicitly and incidentally teach vocabulary, and to include information about Tier 2 words at the grade level that we were teaching. Now, the revisions that I made were more of a grammatical aspect, and I wanted also to include some more words in the writing to help the readers make more sense of what is it that I was trying to explain. And I also made the paper look in a APA format, which is why I included appropriate citations and a reference list. Now, I chose this assignment because of how much I've used some of these strategies with my students, both as a special education teacher working with English language learners and as a clinical neuropsychologist. I've used these strategies many times. For instance, I've used with students that have dyslexia, given that they have a very hard time acquiring new vocabulary. I've used it with ADD students and especially with students with aphasia. Now, but most of all, I chose this artifact because of a very special case that I had when I wrote this paper. I had a really hard and fascinating case of a 5-year-old Korean little girl. Let's call her Anne for the purpose of this work, for this paper. Her father spoke, just a little bit about her background, is that her father spoke perfect Korean and Spanish. Mom spoke only Korean, and they had been living in Paraguay for the past 20 years. According to another Korean teacher, Anne's Spanish was better than her Korean, making Spanish actually her mother tongue. But this little girl had a language disorder that affected her capability to articulate words and making it extremely hard to understand. Her syntax, her semantics, her pragmatical language, they were all affected. And in addition, she had many oppositional defiant behaviors. I was a bit lost with this case when I started. Before I had read chapter 4 from Hugon and Smart, I kept using pictures of flashcards and asked Anne to categorize the pictures according to animals, peoples, things. And as a result, the growth was very poor, and I was starting to feel useless as a professional. But after I read this chapter from Hugon and Smart, I started to use the dialogic reading strategy and started using books in an interactive and a dialogic way. I used the dialogic reading prompts crowd strategy that is described on pages 40 to 41. And it was a really, really useful strategy for this little girl. It was like night and day for the growth that we could see. Just to explain a little bit the strategy, C stands for completions prompts. I had to use this step many times because Anne didn't know how to make full sentences. So using this step helped her feeling involved and engaged. And for example, I would say, Bingo and his family went to the, and she would have to just say farm. R stands for recall questions, and recalling details or sequential events. So for instance, what did Bingo use to help the children? And what will happen now? The O stands for open-ended questions such as, why do you think that Emily Elizabeth didn't want those apples? And W stands for WH questions. What do you call this and what are they doing? And this was very appropriate for Anne because it gave me a lot more flexibility and freedom to include very basic words. And D, this is the final step, stands for distancing questions. And it gave an opportunity to Anne to make connections with the book. So I tried using more books that Anne could make connections to. For example, when the dad told me that they had gone to the farm, I included a book where Bingo had gone to the farm so that she could tell me more about the things, tell me about when you rode the horse in the farm and tell me about the things that you saw in the farm. And after I used it, I started using this crowd strategy. Parents and teachers could see a huge development of Anne's oral language, and as a result, they all started to apply this strategy at home and at school as well. I've always thought that the development of vocabulary was mostly an isolated activity, making lists, writing definitions, applying them in sentences. However, this paper provided me with a whole toolbox of on how to teach vocabulary, and I found these strategies to be extremely helpful and proven that they work and they help my students be successful.